The sun hung low in the sky, casting a warm golden hue over the Bavarian countryside as Klaus Müller adjusted the rearview mirror of his old Land Rover. The engine hummed steadily, a comforting sound that echoed the rhythm of their excitement. Beside him, his son Lucas bounced in his seat, eyes wide with anticipation as they navigated the winding roads leading into the heart of the Alps. "Are we almost there, Dad?" Lucas asked, his voice bubbling with enthusiasm. "Just a little further," Klaus replied with a smile, glancing at his son. At 15, Lucas was on the cusp of adulthood, but today he was still a boy, full of dreams and eager to learn. "Remember to keep your eyes peeled for wildlife. You never know what we might see." As they drove deeper into the mountains, the landscape transformed. The lush green fields gave way to dense forests, and towering peaks loomed in the distance, their summits dusted with snow. Klaus felt a familiar thrill wash over him. This was his sanctuary. He had spent countless weekends here as a boy, learning to hunt under his father's watchful eye. Now he was passing that legacy down to Lucas. "Look," Lucas pointed excitedly out of the window. "A deer." Klaus slowed down as they approached a clearing where a lone doe grazed peacefully. Her ears twitched at the sound of their vehicle, but she remained calm, accustomed to the presence of humans in this beautiful landscape. Klaus parked the car and turned off the engine. "Let's take a moment," he suggested, stepping out into the crisp mountain air. The scent of pine and earth enveloped him, grounding him in this moment. Lucas hopped out and joined his father by the roadside. They stood in silence for a few moments, watching the doe as she nibbled on grass, oblivious to their presence. It was moments like these that Klaus cherished, the connection to nature and the tranquility it offered. "Dad," Lucas said softly, "do you think we'll see anything bigger today?" Klaus chuckled. "Patience is key in hunting, my boy. We'll have our chances if we stay quiet and observant." He ruffled Lucas's hair affectionately before returning to the car to grab their gear. They drove on until they reached their destination, a rustic cabin nestled among towering pines near a sparkling lake. The cabin had been in Klaus's family for generations, its wooden beams weathered by time yet sturdy and welcoming. As they unloaded their gear, rifles, ammunition, and camping supplies, Lucas's excitement bubbled over. "Can we go for a quick hike before dinner?" he asked eagerly. "Of course," Klaus replied. "But let's make sure we're back before dark." They set off along a narrow trail that wound through the forest. The vibrant colors of autumn surrounded them, crimson leaves fluttered down from branches above like confetti celebrating their arrival. Max, their loyal German shepherd, bounded ahead, sniffing every tree and bush with uncontainable enthusiasm. "Do you remember your first hunt?" Klaus asked as they walked side by side. Lucas nodded enthusiastically. "I was so nervous, but you showed me how to be calm and focused." Klaus smiled at the memory. "You did well for your first time. I was proud of you." He paused for a moment before adding, "Hunting isn't just about taking an animal, it's about respect, for nature and for life itself." Lucas listened intently as they continued along the path. The sounds of rustling leaves and distant bird calls filled the air, creating a symphony that only nature could compose. As they reached a small clearing overlooking the lake, Klaus stopped to take it all in. "Look at that view," he said, gesturing toward the shimmering water reflecting the fiery colors of sunset. "This is why we come here." Lucas stood beside him in awe, feeling small yet connected to something much larger than himself. In that moment, he understood why hunting was more than just a pastime for his father. It was a way of life, a tradition steeped in history and respect. As darkness began to settle over the mountains, they made their way back to the cabin. Inside, they prepared dinner together, grilling sausages over an open fire while Max lay at their feet, watching eagerly for scraps. After dinner, Klaus pulled out an old photo album filled with pictures from past hunts, his father with proud trophies and young Klaus standing next to deer he had harvested as a boy. "This was my first stag," Klaus said nostalgically as he pointed to an image of himself at age 12, grinning ear to ear beside a magnificent animal. Lucas studied each photo carefully, imagining himself in those moments, learning from his father just as Klaus had learned from his own dad. As night enveloped them and stars began to twinkle overhead like diamonds scattered across velvet, Klaus felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over him. He looked at Lucas and Max. The two most. Lucas nodded eagerly before yawning widely. "I can't wait." The dawn broke over the Bavarian Alps, casting a soft, golden light through the cabin's windows. Klaus awoke to the sound of birds chirping outside, a cheerful chorus that filled the crisp morning air. He stretched and glanced at the clock, 5:30 a.m. It was time to rise and prepare for the day's adventure. "Lucas," he called, nudging his son's bedroom door open. "Time to get up. The early bird catches the worm." Lucas groaned but rolled out of bed, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Do we have to?" he mumbled, still half asleep. "Yes, we do," Klaus replied with a chuckle. "We've got a big day ahead of us. Grab your gear and meet me outside in 10 minutes. As Lucas dressed, Klaus made his way to the kitchen to start brewing coffee and preparing breakfast. The aroma of sizzling bacon soon filled the cabin, mingling with the fresh mountain air that wafted in through the open window. Max trotted in, tail wagging excitedly as he sniffed the air. "Good morning, Max. Ready for an adventure?" Klaus scratched behind the dog's ears, earning a happy bark in response. When Lucas finally emerged, dressed and ready, he was greeted by the enticing smell of breakfast. "Wow, you really went all out this morning," he said, his eyes lighting up at the sight of bacon and eggs. "I figured we could use some energy for our hunt," Klaus replied with a grin. They dug into their meal, sharing stories and laughter as they prepared for their day in the woods. After breakfast, they gathered their gear, rifles, ammunition, and Lucas's new hunting jacket that Klaus had bought him for this trip. "Remember what I taught you about safety," Klaus reminded him as they loaded their rifles. "Always be aware of your surroundings and never point your weapon at anything you don't intend to shoot." Lucas nodded earnestly. "I know, Dad, I'll be careful." With everything packed and Max leading the way, they set off into the forest just as the sun began to rise higher in the sky. The air was crisp and cool, invigorating as they walked along a well-worn path that wound through towering pines and vibrant foliage. Klaus took a moment to appreciate the beauty around them, the way sunlight filtered through leaves like liquid gold, casting dappled shadows on the forest floor. "This is what it's all about," he said quietly to himself. "Dad," Lucas interrupted his thoughts. "What's our plan for today?" "Today we'll focus on tracking," Klaus explained as they walked. "I want you to learn how to read signs, tracks in the mud, broken branches, anything that tells us where animals might be." They stopped at a small clearing where Klaus knelt down to examine some fresh tracks in the soft earth. "Look here," he said, pointing at the prints. "These are from a deer, probably a doe based on their size." Lucas crouched beside him, studying the tracks intently. "So we follow these?" "Exactly," Klaus replied with a nod. "But remember, we need to move quietly and patiently." As they continued deeper into the woods, Klaus shared stories from his own childhood hunts, how he had once tracked a magnificent stag for hours before finally taking his shot. Lucas listened with rapt attention, imagining himself in those moments alongside his father. Hours passed as they navigated through dense underbrush and climbed gentle slopes. They spotted squirrels darting up trees and heard distant calls of birds echoing through the canopy above. Suddenly, Max perked up, ears alert and nose twitching as he caught a scent on the wind. He darted ahead into the brush. "Max, come back," Lucas called anxiously. Klaus raised a hand to signal for silence. "Let him go," he whispered. "He knows what he's doing." They watched as Max moved gracefully through the underbrush, his instincts guiding him like an experienced tracker. After a few moments of anticipation, Max returned with a triumphant bark, wagging his tail vigorously. "What did you find?" Lucas asked excitedly. Klaus smiled at his son's enthusiasm. "Let's see if we can follow him." They moved cautiously behind Max as he led them deeper into the forest until they reached another clearing, a small glade surrounded by thick trees where sunlight poured in like liquid gold. "Wow," Lucas breathed as he took in the scene before him, a tranquil oasis alive with nature's sounds. Suddenly, something caught his eye, movement near a thicket at the edge of the clearing. "There," Lucas pointed eagerly. Klaus squinted toward where Lucas was pointing and saw it too, a young doe grazing peacefully just beyond their reach. The sight filled both father and son with awe. It was moments like these that made all their efforts worthwhile. "Remember," Klaus whispered softly, "this is about respect for nature. We observe but do not disturb." They stood silently together, father and son, watching as nature unfolded before them in its purest form. The doe lifted her head occasionally but seemed unaware of their presence. After several minutes of quiet observation, Klaus turned to Lucas with a smile. "What do you think? Isn't this incredible?" "It really is," Lucas replied softly, his eyes wide with wonder. As they prepared to move on quietly so as not to startle the doe away, Klaus felt a swell of pride in his heart, not just for his son's enthusiasm but for their shared experience in this beautiful wilderness. "Let's keep moving," Klaus said gently after a while. "We've got more ground to cover if we want to find something bigger today." With renewed energy and excitement coursing through them both, they ventured further into the woods. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees as Klaus and Lucas trekked deeper into the forest. The air was filled with the earthy scent of damp leaves and pine needles, invigorating and alive. Max trotted ahead, his tail wagging, as he explored every nook and cranny of the underbrush. "Dad," Lucas said, breaking the comfortable silence, "do you think we'll see a stag today?" Klaus smiled at his son's enthusiasm. "It's possible. They tend to be more active during the cooler parts of the day. We just need to be patient." As they walked, they practiced their tracking skills, examining broken branches and paw prints in the soft earth. Klaus encouraged Lucas to look for signs of wildlife activity, scratches on trees where deer had rubbed their antlers, fresh droppings indicating recent passage. After a while, they came upon a small stream trickling gently through the forest. The sound of water added a soothing backdrop to their surroundings. Klaus motioned for Lucas to stop. "Let's take a break here," he suggested. They settled on a fallen log beside the stream, taking a moment to hydrate and enjoy the peaceful ambiance. "Do you ever feel nervous when you're hunting?" Lucas asked, his voice thoughtful. Klaus considered the question carefully. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I've learned that nerves can be good, they keep you alert and focused. It's important to respect what we're doing out here." Lucas nodded, absorbing his father's words. "I want to be brave like you." "You already are," Klaus replied warmly. "Bravery isn't just about being fearless, it's about facing your fears and doing what you believe is right." Feeling refreshed, they resumed their journey along the stream, following its winding path deeper into the woods. Suddenly, Max stopped abruptly, his body tense as he sniffed the air. "What is it, boy?" Klaus asked, sensing something was off. Max growled softly and began to move cautiously toward a thicket of bushes ahead. Klaus exchanged a concerned glance with Lucas before following closely behind. As they approached, they heard a faint sound, a distressed whimpering that sent chills down Lucas's spine. Klaus pushed aside branches to reveal a heart-wrenching sight, a magnificent stag caught in a poacher's trap. "Oh no," Lucas gasped, covering his mouth with his hand. The stag was struggling against the metal jaws of the trap that clamped tightly around its leg. Its eyes were wide with fear and pain, and it thrashed helplessly against its restraints. Klaus knelt beside the trapped animal, assessing the situation quickly. "We need to help it," he said firmly but calmly. "But Dad," Lucas protested, "what if it gets scared and hurts us?" Klaus met his son's gaze with steady resolve. "We can't just leave it here to suffer. We have to try." Taking a deep breath, Klaus approached slowly, speaking in soothing tones to calm the frightened creature. "Easy now. It's okay. We're here to help you." Lucas watched anxiously as his father reached for the trap mechanism. He could see the stag's muscles tensing with every movement Klaus made. "Be careful," he urged softly. "I will," Klaus assured him without taking his eyes off the stag. With careful precision, he began working on the trap's latch while keeping his voice low and gentle. After what felt like an eternity of tense moments filled with quiet whimpers from the stag and soft encouragement from Klaus, he finally managed to release the mechanism with a click. The trap sprang open, and Klaus quickly pulled back as the stag instinctively jumped up and bolted into the underbrush. "Did we do it?" Lucas asked breathlessly. Klaus stood up slowly, wiping sweat from his brow as he took a moment to gather himself. "Yes," he replied with relief flooding through him. "We did." But as they turned to leave, they heard rustling nearby, an ominous sound that sent shivers down their spines. Klaus instinctively raised his rifle slightly as they both scanned their surroundings. "Dad, what was that?" Lucas whispered nervously. Before Klaus could respond, two men emerged from behind a cluster of trees, rough-looking figures clad in camouflage gear who eyed them suspiciously. One of them stepped forward, a sneer on his face. "What do we have here?" he said mockingly. "A couple of wannabe hunters playing hero." Klaus felt a surge of protectiveness over Lucas as he stepped in front of him slightly. "We were just helping that stag," he said firmly but calmly. The second man laughed derisively. "Helping? More like interfering." He gestured toward where the stag had fled moments earlier. "That was our catch." Lucas looked up at his father with wide eyes filled with fear and confusion. Klaus remained composed despite the tension crackling in the air. "We don't want any trouble," Klaus said steadily. "But we can't allow you to continue trapping animals illegally." The first man took a step closer, eyes narrowing dangerously. "You think you can just waltz in here and play by your own rules? This is our territory." Klaus felt adrenaline coursing through him as he assessed their options. He needed to protect Lucas while also finding a way out of this confrontation safely. Just then, Max growled lowly at their feet, a warning that sent chills down both men's spines. "Get your dog under control," one of them snapped, but Max stood firm beside Klaus and Lucas, ready to defend them if necessary. "Let's go," Klaus said quietly to Lucas without breaking eye contact with the men. They needed to retreat before things escalated further. As they turned slowly away from the poachers and began moving back toward where they had come from, one of them called after them mockingly, "You'll regret this. You don't know who you're messing with." Klaus felt a knot tighten in his stomach as they walked briskly away from danger, his mind racing with thoughts of what had just transpired and how close they had come to being caught up in something far more dangerous than they had anticipated. Once they were far enough away from earshot but still within sight of their path home, Klaus stopped and took a deep breath to steady himself. "Are you okay?" he asked Lucas softly. I think so," Lucas replied shakily but determinedly. "But what if they come after us?" "They won't," Klaus reassured him firmly but gently placing a hand on his shoulder. "We'll report them when we get back to town." As they continued walking back through the forest toward safety, both father and son felt an unspoken bond deepen between them. A shared understanding that this hunt would be unlike any other they had experienced before. The beauty of nature was still all around them, yet now it was tinged with an awareness of danger lurking beneath its surface. A reminder that respect for wildlife also meant standing up against those who threatened it. And as they made their way homeward together, hearts pounding yet resolute, they knew this day would forever change their lives in ways they could never have imagined. The sun dipped lower in the sky as Klaus and Lucas made their way back through the forest, the earlier excitement of their hunt now overshadowed by the encounter with the poachers. The cheerful sounds of nature that had once surrounded them now felt distant, replaced by an unsettling silence that hung heavy in the air. "Dad, do you think they'll really come after us?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Klaus glanced at his son, noting the worry etched on his face. "It's possible, but we'll be careful. We know these woods better than they do," he reassured him. "Let's keep moving and stay alert." Klaus glanced at his son, noting the worry etched on his face. "It's possible, but we'll be careful. We know these woods better than they do," he reassured him. "Let's keep moving and stay alert." As they walked, Klaus's mind raced with thoughts of how to handle the situation. Reporting the poachers was essential, but he needed to ensure that Lucas felt safe first. They had come to the mountains for a bonding experience, not to confront danger. Max trotted ahead, sniffing the ground and occasionally glancing back at them as if sensing their unease. Klaus admired his dog's instincts. Max had always been a reliable companion in the field. After a while, they reached a familiar clearing where they had seen deer before. Klaus motioned for Lucas to stop and crouch low behind a cluster of bushes. "Let's take a moment to catch our breath and observe," he said quietly. Lucas nodded, his heart still racing from their earlier encounter. They settled into silence, watching for any signs of movement in the underbrush. The tension from their confrontation lingered in the air like an uninvited guest. Suddenly, Max perked up again, ears twitching as he focused intently on something in the distance. Klaus followed his gaze and saw movement near the edge of the clearing, a shadowy figure slipping between the trees. "Stay low," Klaus whispered urgently. He raised his binoculars to get a better look. What he saw made his stomach drop. It was one of the poachers from earlier, along with another man. They were crouched low, whispering to each other as they scanned the area. Klaus could see that they were armed, each carrying rifles slung over their shoulders. "They're hunting," Klaus murmured, his voice filled with concern. "And they're not just hunting for sport." "What do we do?" Lucas asked, fear creeping into his voice. Klaus thought quickly. "We need to move away from here without being seen. If they're poaching, we can't let them know we're around." They slowly backed away from the clearing, keeping low and using the trees as cover. Klaus felt a mix of anger and determination rising within him. These men were threatening not only wildlife but also their right to enjoy nature responsibly. As they moved quietly through the underbrush, Klaus couldn't shake off a sense of urgency. They needed to gather evidence against these poachers before it was too late. But how could they do that without putting themselves in danger? Suddenly, Max stopped again, this time growling softly as he stared into the thick brush ahead. Klaus held up a hand for silence and listened carefully. From behind a nearby tree, another figure emerged, this time a woman dressed in camouflage gear with a camera slung around her neck. She looked startled when she spotted Klaus and Lucas. "Who are you?" she asked cautiously, raising her hand slightly as if to show she meant no harm. Klaus relaxed slightly but remained alert. "We're just hunters out here for the weekend," he replied carefully. "But we've encountered some poachers nearby." The woman's eyes widened with concern. "Poachers? Here, I've been tracking them for weeks." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I'm part of a wildlife conservation group trying to gather evidence against illegal hunting operations in this area." Klaus exchanged glances with Lucas, who seemed intrigued yet cautious about this unexpected encounter. "I'm Drive, Anna Fisher," she introduced herself quickly. "I've been documenting their activities, setting traps and hunting protected species." She gestured toward her camera. "I have photos and videos that could help bring them down." Klaus felt a surge of hope at her words. "We need to report them," he said urgently. "But we have to be careful, they're armed." Anna nodded gravely. "I know this area well. I can help you navigate safely while gathering evidence." Lucas looked between his father and Anna, clearly impressed by her confidence and knowledge of wildlife conservation. "Let's move quickly," Klaus said decisively. "We need to find a safe vantage point where we can observe them without being detected." With Anna leading the way through the dense underbrush, they moved stealthily toward a ridge overlooking the clearing where they had spotted the poachers earlier. As they climbed higher up the slope, Klaus felt a renewed sense of purpose. Their mission had shifted from simply hunting to protecting what was rightfully theirs, nature itself. Once they reached a suitable spot hidden behind some rocks and trees, Anna pulled out her camera and began scanning for signs of activity below. "Look," she whispered urgently as she pointed toward the clearing below where two men were now setting up makeshift traps along the game trail. Klaus raised his binoculars again and focused on their movements. He could see one man kneeling down to adjust a trap while another stood watchfully nearby. "We need clear photos," Anna instructed quietly as she snapped pictures rapidly, capturing evidence of their illegal activities. Lucas watched intently as Anna worked with precision and determination, her passion for wildlife conservation evident in every click of her camera shutter. Suddenly, one of the poachers glanced up toward their direction as if sensing something amiss. Klaus held his breath as both men turned slightly but then shrugged it off and continued their work. "Stay quiet," he urged softly to Lucas and Max as they waited anxiously for more evidence before retreating safely. Minutes passed like hours until finally Anna declared triumphantly, "I got enough. Let's get out of here before they notice us." They retraced their steps carefully until they reached a safe distance away from the clearing where they had observed the poachers at work. Once they were far enough away to feel secure again, Klaus turned to Anna with gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thank you for your help today," he said sincerely. "We couldn't have done this without you." Anna smiled warmly back at him before glancing down at Lucas, who looked both excited and relieved by what had just transpired. "Now we need to get this evidence back to town," she said firmly. "If we act quickly enough, we can alert authorities before these men have a chance to escape." As they made their way back through familiar trails towards safety together, father and son alongside their new ally, they knew that this hunt had transformed into something far more significant than any trophy or game animal could ever represent. It was about standing up against greed and protecting nature for future generations. And deep within each of them burned an unyielding resolve, a commitment not just to hunting but also to preserving life in all its forms amidst shadows cast by those who sought only profit over respect. The days that followed Eleanor's discovery in the greenhouse were filled with a sense of urgency. The letters and artifacts from Arthur's hidden box weighed heavily on her mind, each piece hinting at a larger mystery that demanded to be unraveled. With Inspector Graham by her side, they began to delve deeper into the secrets of the Blackwood family, determined to uncover the truth behind Arthur's cryptic warnings. After reviewing the letters, Eleanor and Inspector Graham decided to investigate the identity of Thomas, the friend mentioned in Arthur's correspondence. They hoped he could provide insight into Arthur's concerns about their family lineage and any potential threats that might have arisen from it. "Let's start by checking with some of the older residents in Ravenswood," Inspector Graham suggested one afternoon as they sat at a small cafe in the village square, sipping tea. "They might remember Thomas or know something about your uncle's past." Eleanor nodded, her heart racing with anticipation. "I remember hearing my uncle mention a few names when I was younger, friends he had from his youth. Maybe one of them will lead us to Thomas." They finished their drinks and set off toward Mrs. Collins' house, a local historian who had lived in Ravenswood her entire life. She was known for her extensive knowledge of the village's history and its residents. As they approached Mrs. Collins' quaint cottage, Eleanor felt a mix of hope and anxiety. Would she have information that could help them? They knocked on the door, and moments later, Mrs. Collins opened it with a warm smile. "Eleanor, what a lovely surprise," she exclaimed, pulling Eleanor into a gentle embrace. "And Inspector Graham, what brings you both here?" "Thank you for seeing us, Mrs. Collins," Eleanor said, stepping inside the cozy home filled with bookshelves and framed photographs. "We're hoping you can help us with something regarding my Uncle Arthur." "Of course, anything for Arthur," Mrs. Collins replied, leading them to her sitting room where they settled into comfortable chairs. Eleanor took a deep breath before speaking. "We found some letters in Arthur's belongings that mentioned a friend named Thomas. Do you know anyone by that name? Perhaps someone from his past?" Mrs. Collins furrowed her brow in thought. "Thomas? Yes, I believe I remember a Thomas Hargrove. He was quite close to Arthur when they were younger, almost like brothers, I'd say." Eleanor exchanged glances with Inspector Graham, who leaned forward with interest. "What can you tell us about him?" he asked. "Well, Mrs. Collins began, Thomas was a bright young man with dreams of adventure. He and Arthur would often explore the countryside together. But after some time, they lost touch, something about differing paths in life." She paused, her expression turning serious. There were whispers that Thomas had fallen into some unsavory dealings. "Unsavory dealings?" Eleanor echoed, her heart racing at this new information. "Yes," Mrs. Collins continued cautiously. "It was said that he became involved with some questionable characters, people who were not good for him or anyone around him." Inspector Graham exchanged a knowing look with Eleanor. "Do you know where we might find him now?" he asked. Mrs. Collins shook her head slowly. "I haven't seen him in years. He left Ravenswood long ago after rumors began to circulate about his activities." She hesitated before adding, "But if you're looking for answers about your uncle's concerns, I suggest checking at the old tavern near the edge of town, the Raven's Nest. It used to be a popular spot for travelers and locals alike. Perhaps someone there has seen Thomas." "Thank you so much for your help," Eleanor said earnestly as they stood to leave. As they stepped back outside into the cool evening air, Eleanor felt a surge of determination wash over her. If Thomas Hargrove held answers about Arthur's fears and the secrets of their family, she was determined to find him. The Raven's Nest was an old tavern with creaky wooden beams and dim lighting that added to its rustic charm. As they entered, Eleanor felt as though she had stepped back in time, The air was thick with laughter and conversation as locals gathered around tables sharing stories over pints of ale. Inspector Graham approached the bar while Eleanor scanned the room for anyone who looked familiar or might know Thomas Hargrove. "Excuse me," Inspector Graham said to the bartender, a burly man with a bushy beard. "We're looking for information about an old resident named Thomas Hargrove." The bartender raised an eyebrow but nodded slowly. "Hargrove. Haven't heard that name in years," he replied thoughtfully as he wiped down the bar top with a rag. "Do you know where we might find him?" Inspector Graham pressed. "He left town some time ago," the bartender said slowly, his eyes narrowing as if recalling distant memories. "Last I heard, he was living somewhere near Bristol. Ran into some trouble with the law if I recall correctly." Eleanor felt her heart sink but quickly regained her composure. "Do you know if he ever comes back to Ravenswood?" The bartender shrugged nonchalantly. "Can't say for sure. Folks like him tend not to return once they've left." He paused before adding, "But if you're looking for trouble or answers about his past dealings, I'd suggest being careful. People don't forget easily." Inspector Graham nodded appreciatively and thanked the bartender before turning back to Eleanor. "It seems we may need to travel to Bristol if we want to find Thomas Hargrove," he said thoughtfully. Eleanor agreed. She felt an urgency building within her to uncover whatever secrets lay hidden there, and how they might connect back to Arthur's death. As they exited the tavern and stepped out into the cool night air once more, Rufus walked closely beside them, his presence reassuring as they prepared for what lay ahead. "We'll find him," Eleanor declared resolutely as they made their way back toward the estate under a canopy of stars twinkling above them like distant promises waiting to be fulfilled. With each step closer toward uncovering these truths, the legacy left behind by her uncle and whatever dangers lingered just beyond their reach, Eleanor knew she would stop at nothing until she had answers about Arthur's life, and perhaps even about herself along this unexpected journey through Ravenswood's hidden pasts. The journey to Bristol was filled with anticipation and unease. Eleanor and Inspector Graham traveled by train, the rhythmic clatter of wheels on tracks echoing the urgency in their hearts. Rufus lay at Eleanor's feet, sensing her tension but remaining a steadfast companion. They had learned that Thomas Hargrove was not just a name from Arthur's past, he was the key to uncovering the truth behind her uncle's death. As they approached Bristol, the landscape shifted from the serene countryside of Ravenswood to the bustling streets of the city. The energy was palpable, a stark contrast to the quiet village they had left behind. Eleanor felt a mix of excitement and anxiety as they stepped off the train and navigated through the crowds. "Where do you think we should start?" Eleanor asked, glancing around at the busy station. "We should check local records or perhaps visit some of the pubs in the area," Inspector Graham suggested. "Thomas might have left a trail if he's still in town." After consulting a map, they made their way to a nearby pub that had been recommended by locals, a dimly lit establishment called the Old Anchor. As they entered, the smell of ale and hearty food enveloped them. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, with patrons engaged in lively conversation. Eleanor approached the bar, her heart racing as she caught sight of a man sitting alone in a corner booth. He had unkempt hair and a weary expression that spoke of hard times. Could this be Thomas Hargrove? "Let me handle this," Inspector Graham said quietly, placing a reassuring hand on Eleanor's shoulder before making his way over to the man. Eleanor watched as Inspector Graham leaned in to speak with Thomas, who looked up with surprise. After a brief exchange, Thomas's expression shifted from confusion to recognition. He nodded slowly as Inspector Graham gestured for Eleanor to join them. "Mr. Hargrove," Inspector Graham began, "this is Eleanor Blackwood, Arthur's niece." Thomas's eyes widened slightly as he took in Eleanor's presence. "Arthur, I haven't heard that name in years," he said cautiously. "We need to talk," Eleanor said firmly, her heart pounding as she took a seat across from him. "My uncle is dead, and I believe you might know something about it." Thomas shifted uncomfortably in his seat, glancing around as if worried someone might overhear them. "I don't know what you're talking about," he replied defensively. "Arthur left clues about something important, something he feared would put you both in danger," Inspector Graham interjected calmly. "We found letters that suggest you were involved in matters that could have jeopardized your friendship with him." Thomas hesitated, his eyes darting between Eleanor and Inspector Graham. Finally, he sighed deeply, running a hand through his hair. "Arthur was right to be cautious," he admitted reluctantly. I got mixed up with some bad people after I left Ravenswood, people who were interested in more than just friendship. What do you mean? Eleanor pressed, leaning forward intently. I was trying to protect Arthur's legacy, Thomas explained slowly. There were rumors about his fortune. People wanted to get their hands on it. I thought if I kept my distance, it would keep him safe. Eleanor felt a surge of anger mixed with confusion. But why didn't you tell him? Why leave him in the dark? I thought I could handle it myself, Thomas replied bitterly. But things spiraled out of control. I received threats, warnings that if Arthur didn't comply with certain demands, he would pay the price. Eleanor felt her stomach drop at his words. What kind of demands? Money? Information about his estate, Thomas said quietly. I tried to warn him without alarming him too much, but he wouldn't listen. He thought he could handle it on his own. Inspector Graham leaned closer, his voice steady but firm. Did you have any contact with him before his death? Thomas shook his head slowly. No, I hadn't seen him in years. But I heard whispers that someone was watching him, someone who wanted what he had. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine as she processed this new information. You mean someone killed him for his fortune? It's possible, Thomas admitted reluctantly. I didn't want to believe it at first, but now it seems like those whispers were more than just rumors, Inspector Graham finished for him. Eleanor sat back in her seat, her mind racing with thoughts of betrayal and loss. Arthur had been trying to protect her legacy from threats she never knew existed, and now it seemed those threats had cost him his life. Do you know who these people are? She asked urgently. I have some names, Thomas replied hesitantly, pulling out a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket and scribbling down several names along with addresses before handing it over to Eleanor. Thank you, she said quietly as she took the paper from him. Inspector Graham glanced at Thomas with an intensity that made Eleanor feel uneasy about what might come next. You need to be careful, he warned Thomas sternly. If these people are involved in Arthur's death, they may come after you next. I know, Thomas replied softly, his gaze dropping to the table as if weighed down by guilt and regret. With their conversation drawing to a close, Eleanor felt both relieved and unsettled by what she had learned. They had uncovered vital information about potential suspects, but there was still much work ahead before justice could be served for Arthur. As they left the old anchor and stepped back into the bustling streets of Bristol, Eleanor clutched the piece of paper tightly in her hand, a tangible reminder of their next steps toward uncovering the truth. We need to follow up on these names immediately, Inspector Graham said decisively as they walked briskly through the crowd. Yes, Eleanor agreed firmly, determination fueling her every step as they made their way toward their next destination. The path toward justice for Arthur Blackwood had begun unfolding before them, with Rufus leading the way beside them. His instincts sharp and unwavering, they felt ready to confront whatever dangers lay ahead in their pursuit of truth and retribution against those who threatened not only Arthur's legacy but also everything Eleanor held dear. Together they would seek justice for Arthur, a mission that promised revelations beyond anything they could have anticipated, but one that also held the potential for healing amidst grief as they uncovered not just secrets but also strength within themselves along this unexpected journey through Ravenswood's hidden pasts.